The elevator repair company was a low-budget operation. As such, the buildings we were sent to were often high-rise apartments in the poorer sections of town. I was heading out to one such place with my new trainee in tow. He was fresh out of school, eager to impress. A bright young kid named Tommy. Tall, with short buzzed hair, always quick to smile, constantly joking around, but able to take things seriously when he had to. I was just beginning to like him. We got to the building and climbed out of our white service van with our duffel bag full of diagnostic gear. Only a week before, we had visited this place to repair the same broken elevator. It was always on the fritz. At least they had a backup, though, so we wouldn't have to climb the stairs. That was one of the worst parts of the job. Some buildings had 30 flights of stairs and only one working elevator, or both would go out on the same day. Those were not fun jobs to go to, since it would often mean climbing up and down the steps multiple times to reach the problem, and to fetch the necessary parts and tools. The superintendent met us in the lobby. Immediately, I couldn't help but notice a fat cockroach scurrying up the wall of the foyer. The place smelled like wet farts and flood damage that had never been repaired. There were yellow water stains on the ceiling and puddles on the aged vermilion carpet that we walked across towards the one working elevator. "I don't know what the hell is wrong with this thing," the superintendent said. I knew what was wrong with it. I had told him he needed to replace an expensive part, but he was too cheap to fix it. As a result, people were getting stuck in the thing constantly. That happened to me in the same elevator not long before, and I didn't envy anybody in that situation. We stepped inside the other lift, and I hit the button for the correct floor. I held down the closed doors button and the 28 button at the same time. This would allow us to rise to the top level without having to wait for people to get on and off. A little secret that firemen and repairmen alike know to get where we need to be a little bit quicker. The door closed with a squealing rattle as it closed heavily across the threshold, clanged shut with a loud metallic noise, and we began to rise in the shaking box. It heaved back and forth as we ascended, knocking me off balance and into the wall. The old piece of shit was not improving with age. "Is that normal?" Tommy asked. "No." We got to the top floor and the door opened up. Exiting the elevator, we heard the desperate calls for help from the box next to ours. "Help! It's so hot in here, I can't breathe. Please help us." "Hey, I'm the elevator repairman," I called down to them. "I'm here to help you get you out." "Thank God." I heard the muffled sounds of their grateful voices as they spoke to each other. It sounded like there were a few of them. No wonder it was so hot in that tiny box. The thought of all that body heat and packed people in such a crowded space filled me with sudden claustrophobic terror. I had never been scared of confined spaces, until I got stuck in that very same box that those people were trapped in. I remembered back to that day, sitting on the floor of the elevator, cockroaches scurrying around me everywhere in the dim and flickering light, the heat becoming oppressive and overwhelming the longer I waited, the air becoming thick and humid, impossible to breathe. I can remember it like it was yesterday. Tommy and I tried to pry open the door, and I found it was completely jammed shut. Unusual, to say the least, but not unheard of. It would require a trip downstairs to the van for a different tool. I let Tommy know what the plan was, and the superintendent, Ronnie, decided to come down as well, so he could let us back in. Down we went in the squealing elevator, rattled and shook violently, descending to the lower levels. We heard a ding, and the door began to slide open, revealing the lobby. I had told Tommy a few rules before we started working together, and as the elevator door slid across its steel track, he unthinkingly broke rule number 3. Don't get off the elevator while the door is still opening. He began to exit the door, rattling open, and I began to say something, reaching out to grab his arm, but it was too late. As he went through the threshold, the door suddenly slammed shut with tremendous speed and force. I would find out later that the superintendent had put this elevator out of service earlier that day, since it had almost decapitated someone else in a similar fashion. He didn't want to climb the stairs, though, so when the other elevator went out of commission, he just started using this one again. None of this he bothered to mention to us. This elevator was old, the steel door heavy, and when it slid shut, it slammed into Tommy with incredible force. Once it hit him, it did not stop, but continued, crushing him like a sledgehammer through an overripe watermelon. Ever see Gallagher? Yeah, kind of like that. His nose caved in and his jaw shattered as the door crushed him with overwhelming power before I could intervene. He gurgled and spat out teeth as I rushed forward to try to push the door open. His head appeared partially caved in, and I saw shards of his skull protruding from the flesh like broken pottery. I was about to put my fingers in the gap, but then thought better of it. Using my pry bar instead, I tried to wrench it open. I jammed the edge of it into the door frame just above Tommy's head. That was when the elevator began to suddenly decide to go up again, this time much quicker. Tommy was still partially trapped, half in, half out of the door, with the entire thing slammed through the middle of him. The pry bar, and then the top of the elevator door, came down on his head as he rose up to the next floor, caving his skull in from a different direction. That was all his brutalized body could take, and the left side of him collapsed into the lift. The other side was still outside in the lobby, and we left it behind as we went up. I began to scream with terror at what had just happened, but the superintendent didn't even seem fazed. He just looked at me calmly as the box rattled and went up with increasing speed. "Shit," he said. "That's not good. Hey man, can you keep a secret? I got cash. We can tell people he was screwing around or got caught in the door. Nobody's fault. Or I can tell them you shoved him. It's up to you." He smiled with his greasy grin. A thick gold necklace hung from his sweaty neck, and his bald head gleamed with beads of perspiration as he waited for my response. Before I could say anything, we began to free fall. The box dropped as if the cable had been cut, and I felt my stomach lurch, and the cheeseburger I'd eaten for lunch began to rise up into my throat in sudden protest. If we had been up on the top floor, we would have died for sure, but as it happened, we hadn't gotten up that far yet. Still, the impact was deafening. The force of us stopping suddenly rattled my bones with horrifying pain. Ronnie, the superintendent, had been brought down to the floor with sudden force, and I saw his forehead was bleeding. He was missing a couple teeth as well. We began to descend again, and my heart began to hammer even faster in my chest. I wanted to get off this hellish ride. And suddenly it stopped. I heard another ding as the elevator door opened in the lobby, revealing the other half of Tommy, as well as a small crowd of disgusted and curious residents. The super got up, scrambled to his feet, and tried to make it out of the box. He didn't quite make it. The door stopped moving and slammed shut once again, landing with sickening force against his bloated midsection. I heard several ribs cracking loudly, and he screamed as it drove itself into him. Blood poured from his mouth, and I raced over to the controls and hit the door open button. Nothing happened. With a large spray of blood like a beach ball-sized water balloon exploding, his body was torn completely in half by the door. I hit the button again and it opened. I waited patiently for it to slide all the way across the track and reach the other side. Then, and only then, did I step forward with confidence, leaving the gore-filled elevator behind. There was going to be a ton of paperwork after this, I thought. Too bad. I'd like the kid. But you got to remember the rules. Maybe I should move that one to the top of the list. A lot of people wanted to know some more rules for elevator safety after my last post. Here is one more for you. Rule number 1. Don't ride the escalator. You say you need an example? An explanation of why not to take these time-saving steel staircases made of gears and chains, pulleys and grease? Just look at all those teeth waiting at the bottom for you. To forget to lift your feet and your flip-flops. Or worse, let's say your hands should somehow slip into the gap. If you should fall down somehow. It happens. Mostly to younger people, but some adults as well. People have had both hands torn clean off. People I know. But the scariest thing about escalators is that they can break. You see them out of service sometimes, and it's an inconvenience, sure. But imagine if they weren't being shut down for proper maintenance. One incident in particular comes to mind that bumped this rule right to the top of the list for me. You see, elevator repair guys don't just fix elevators. We also fix escalators, as you may not have known. And those automatic stair machines are the bane of our existence. We're all terrified of them. We all know someone who's had a hand cut off, a finger pulled out by the damn things. They're that dangerous. But the malls don't want you to know that. Once I was in such a mall, a dirty, low-rent affair like all of our clients ascending the escalator. I was fairly new and hadn't yet learned to always take the stairs if you can, and never, ever ride the escalator. Suddenly, without warning, it began to go backwards. Just imagine that feeling for a second. You're about 2 stories off the ground, mall walkers and wishing fountains full of pennies below, and suddenly you begin to fall sickeningly back, downwards and off balance, towards the floor far below. That's what happens when the main chain snaps. The weight of all those people pull the steel staircase back downwards, faster and faster and faster until you're in a free fall. That's what happened to me. I was about to step my foot forward off the top and onto the linoleum floor when I heard the muffled sound of it breaking. I looked back and saw a dozen other people below me, their eyes confused, then panicked. My stomach dropped sickeningly as if I were plunging backwards down the first drop of a giant roller coaster. I heard people below me scream as the escalator began to fall back faster and faster, crashing down like a massive steel train pulled from a hillside by an unseen colossus. My body turned in midair, and I realized I was flying without the benefit of low gravity or Superman powers. This brought with it the horrible mental image of what was to come. A tangled mass of human forms lay below me as I plummeted towards them. I saw my tools floating around me as I fell, and winced as my flathead screwdriver impaled an elderly woman's eye upon landing. She screamed, and I screamed, and we all screamed for ICU care after I landed on top of her with a tremendous force that caused my jaw to slap shut painfully. When I opened my eyes, I saw a bloodbath all around me. An unfortunate man was howling in pain a few feet away. He had his arm jammed into the teeth at the bottom of the escalator, and several minutes later I witnessed what doctors refer to as degloving when an employee arrived to pull him out. If the word doesn't paint a vivid enough picture, imagine this for a moment. A man with no skin on his hand, flexing and moving his fingers, watching fascinated as he sees his flesh laying on the floor, left behind like a high-quality Halloween mask for his hand. The flesh bunched up and wrinkled, mangled from 100 sharp steel teeth. Blood everywhere. My head was pounding and I felt heat running down the side of my face as a man in blue approached and asked if I was okay, and could I get up. I said I needed a minute, but then I realized it was slightly urgent when I saw the bloodied face beneath my boot. I had ended up on top of several people, including the now dead octogenarian, which I had unwittingly impaled with my favorite screwdriver. The mall manager walked over to me and stared down at me ruefully. Do you have any idea how much this is going to cost to clean up? I told him I had no idea. He grabbed me by the arm and pulled me up off the other people. At first I mistook his actions for trying to help, but then his security guard goons grabbed me and started to push and shove me towards his office, down a long, long hallway. My heart began to pound in my chest. Where the hell were they taking me? I need a hospital. I think I broke my jaw, I told them, but they ignored me. The dingy walls and floors got dirtier and darker with neglect as they pushed me down back halls to an isolated room. They shoved me in there and locked the door, leaving me alone in the cold room. The space was empty save for a single steel folding chair and a light bulb. It looked like an interrogation room at Guantanamo Bay. I could feel my pulse beating quick and heard it drumming in my ears as I tapped my foot in nervous exasperation. The minutes ticked by, turning into hours. My fear began to increase exponentially as I realized they were going to try and somehow cover this up. But how? Hundreds of people had seen it. It was foolish of them to even try. I waited in the room full of anxious fear until someone came in. But it wasn't the manager or a security guard. This man was dressed in a expensive-looking suit, had green eyes and short slicked hair. He looked like a lawyer. Hello, my name is Gregory, and you are? Pissed off is what I am. What the hell is this anyways? You guys have kidnapped me. This is an abduction. I'm being held against my will, and I want to leave right now. He clicked his tongue. I have a proposition for you here. Why don't you take a look? I think you'll find the terms are quite generous. I was about to spit in his face, then thought better of it. They had the upper hand currently. My heart hammered faster and faster in my chest as I read the legal form in front of me. I always had a feeling this section of town was rotten. Now I knew for sure. My service area was starting to feel a lot less safe all of a sudden. To whom it may concern, it appears as if you had had a bit of a mishap at one of our fine commercial, residential, or industrial properties. Please find enclosed one coupon for 50% off your choice of chili or soup in a bread bowl from any Sal's Soup and Sammy's locations. It's our little way of saying sorry for whatever happened to you. No admission of guilt. Just wanted to do you a solid. Your pal, the Devil, owner of Loosey Goose Properties, Inc. I decided to take the coupon and left, saying I wouldn't tell anyone what had happened. It didn't sit right with me, but the man with smoke rising from his shoulders, who stood by the doorway without ever having entered the room, told me it was a good idea just to sign it. Either that, or join the others who were now being made into happy dogs to be sold in the food court. I really got to move out of this town. I hate this neighborhood. Are you ready for more elevator safety tips? Alright, here goes. Rule number 3. Previously rule number 2. Really, you're going to want to follow all of these, so the order doesn't matter much, as you'll find out below. Breaking the third rule can easily be the most deadly mistake you'll ever make. Rule number 3. Don't step inside the elevator without looking. You might ask, why not? Well, let's just say that the elevator isn't always going to be there when you think it's going to be there. Let's say you're looking at your phone, as I was, checking the location of your next service call. You hear those doors slide open, and you don't even glance up as you take a step forward. But as you take that next fateful step inside, you realize that something feels wrong. Why is everything black around the periphery of your phone? Why do you feel dread crawling up your spine? That's why you look before stepping into the elevator. Because if you don't, you'll find yourself like I did, falling down and screaming as you drop down an elevator shaft made of darkness. And down below are not nice things. It is not a comfortable landing zone. It is quite the opposite. I fell down hard towards that deadly pit of metal parts, and the only thing that managed to save me was that I grabbed onto a cable as I was descending. It bit into my hands, and I felt it tear the flesh to pieces as I slowed, but I held firm, knowing that I would surely die without some way to slow my descent. Blood began to pour down my arms, and I felt the cable start to grind against the bones of my fingers as I gradually began to slow. The slippery gore didn't help to slow my progress, though, and pretty soon I found myself speeding up, going faster and faster once again, down into the abyss. I forced myself to grip the cable even more tightly and ground my teeth against the agony of the cable rubbing against my phalanges. When I finally got to the bottom, I was not ready for it. My feet finally hit the ground. I felt both ankles break. I screamed and wailed in agony, writhing on the cold, hard ground. I called out for anyone to save me. No one came. I waited and waited, calling out over and over again my desperate cries for help, absorbed by the thick concrete and steel surrounding me. And pretty soon I heard a sound from above and realized it was the elevator door coming down towards me. My heart began to pound faster and faster. I screamed at the top of my lungs. Stop the elevator. There's someone down below. There's someone down below. I heard it coming closer in the darkness, the sound soon right on top of me. A metallic shaking and rattling which took over the world, made my teeth tremble in their sockets. Came down on my face, and I braced myself for death, shrunk backwards, making myself as small as possible. I felt the flat surface of the bottom of the elevator mashing into my nose and heard the bones inside of it breaking, but then it stopped, just before it completely obliterated my skull. As I howled in pain and terror, I felt shards of bone going down my throat and coughed, gagging on their sharp edges. Screamed through a mouthful of broken teeth. Someone down there? I heard from just above me. Yes, go up. My nose was being crushed so badly I couldn't even yell. Hang on, let me take my earbuds out. What'd you say, dude? I screamed. Oh, shit. Hang on, man. I'm gonna go get you some help. Away he went, casually walking off by the sounds of it, leaving me there with the elevator smashed into my face, barely enough oxygen for me to breathe and stay alive for more than a few minutes. I waited in that claustrophobia-inducing darkness and tried to control my breathing. This too will pass, I told myself, over and over again. Only a few minutes. He'll be back. But the metal was crushing my face in the most excruciating way, and there was no possible way to get comfortable. I twisted and writhed, trying to make room. Found none. The air was thick, the darkness total and complete. Pretty soon I began to panic and hyperventilate, as time stretched out forever, each second suddenly feeling like an hour or a day. I had no idea how long I was there for, that I was going to die in that elevator shaft. And then I heard someone running towards me from down the hallway. I heard them hit the button to open the door, and they got on the elevator and it began to ascend. Turned out it was another elevator technician from my company who the building manager had called. Hadn't bothered to check on me. They just called it in and left me there. The guy's name was Pete, and he had been working in the elevator repair business for over 30 years. He had heard the emergency call and raced over, leaving the job he had been on behind. He pried open the door and pulled me out of there, clapping me on the back and telling me that I was lucky to be alive. I was incapable of speech, sobbed thank you as blood poured from my nose and down in my throat. Sharp pieces of bone stuck out at odd angles from my broken ankles. He helped me from the building and told me to always remember the rules. I was new and I had no idea what that meant. I was so curious that even through the pain I managed to ask him, "What rules?" "Got a lot to learn, kid," he said. "I got a whole list of them. Come on, I'll tell you about them on the way to the hospital. Trust me, you're going to get to know that place real well." After Pete rescued me from being crushed by the elevator, we became close. He eventually started to refer to me as his protege, and I felt like that was an apt word for our semi-professional relationship. Most of the lessons I learned were from him, and they saved my life on more than one occasion. When he was visiting me in the hospital after I broke both my ankles falling down the elevator shaft, he regaled me with tales from his own experiences of elevator repair hell. Back in the 70s, safety regulations were even more lax, so we had quite a few brushes with death. It was my third night in the trauma unit, and I had had one of several surgical procedures earlier that day. They put a series of pins and steel rods in my legs. I had broken my distal tibia and fibula, the doctors told me, and I had ended up with what they referred to as compound fractures, where the bones break completely and stab through the skin. I had 4 of those fractures, 2 on each side. It looked pretty gnarly before I finally got fixed up. I'd come out of the haze of anesthesia, and Pete decided he would tell me a story to try to cheer me up. His thinking was that it might brighten my day to hear about his own experiences that had been debatably even worse than mine. It did not help. In fact, it just made me have even more intense and terrifying opioid-fueled nightmares. But it was a nice thought. "Okay, kid, I'll tell you a good tip to remember while you're out there. If you're ever stuck in an elevator, just stay put." He looked at me and winked, a little grin on his face. "That's it?" I asked, still groggy from the medication. "How come?" "Is this a good enough reason for you?" he asked, lifting up his pant leg to reveal a fake wooden leg. "What the hell happened there?" "Well, back when I was younger, about your age, I got stuck inside a box on an old mental hospital on the weekend. There was nobody around, and the security guards were new, I guess, and didn't know what they were doing, so they just silenced the emergency call button of the elevator thinking it was malfunctioning. They didn't realize I was stuck inside. I tried calling for help, but nobody answered. I screamed and screamed for several hours, then ended up in there all night, then the next day, and then another night. By Sunday, I was losing my mind. I was thirsty, starving, afraid nobody was going to come for me. So I tried to pry the doors open. I managed to get them open, and I saw I was just below the basement. The box had stalled on the way up. and I realized I could pull myself up and then get down on my belly and crawl out of there. But I was worried because I knew this was dangerous. If the box decided to move at exactly that moment, I could easily die, be severed right in half. That happens far more often than you could possibly imagine. I decided I needed to take the risk. I'd been stuck in there for so long, I was terrified I would die there. Thinking back, I should have just stayed put, but try telling that to a young man in his 20s who has his whole life ahead of him and thinks he's invincible. I told myself that box wasn't going to move at that exact moment. There was no chance of that, but I was wrong. Just then, as it happened, another guy from my company had been sent over to check the elevator. Well, he got things moving again, just as my midsection was crossing the threshold to the other side. I had only an instant to react, and I did. Pulled up my waist and my right leg as quick as I could, reflexively, since I was terrified of that happening. But my other leg wasn't so lucky, as you see here. Holy shit. Holy shit is right. The elevator ceiling came down on it, and it didn't just break it, it pulled me in. I felt myself being sucked down into the elevator as it went down and down, taking me with it. I dug my nails into the linoleum floor and howled in pain until it finally ripped my leg clean off. Pulled it out like a drumstick from a turkey dinner. Clicked his tongue. Mimed this. I ended up on the same floor where we're on right now, in a hospital bed that looks a little bit like the one you're sitting in. At least you get to keep your legs. A frowny nurse walked in wearing a set of colorless green scrubs and carrying a small plastic cup full of pills and a needle in her hands. She set these items down on my bedside table wordlessly and pumped some liquid hand sanitizer in her hands from a nearby dispenser. "Visiting hours are now over," she said to Pete, her eyes cold and compassionless. "Sure," he said, getting up to leave. He gathered his coat. Something fell out of his pocket onto the bed. I didn't notice it at first. Didn't even realize it happened until after he left. The nurse gave me my pills and a blood thinner medication that left an irritating bee sting feeling that didn't go away for several hours. Once she was gone, I noticed the object sitting on the bed beside me. A small golden pin with the initials SUERM on it. At first I thought it said sperm, and I giggled a little bit, but then I realized I was still just crazy high from the epidural and my last dose of IV morphine. I read it again, tried to figure out what it meant. I would need to ask Pete about it later, I thought. Then the nurse came back in. "Oh, by the way," she said, "I forgot. Your family called. Your dog just died." She walked away without another word, and that was the last I saw of her for the rest of the night, despite my terrible pain in the ringing call bell for hours on end. I was told the next morning the call bell system had gone out, and they'd been doing hourly rounds. I hadn't seen anyone. The rest of the stay in that place wasn't much better. I won't bore you with the details of my hospital-acquired infections and the eventual dependence on opioids that resulted from my time there, from my botched surgeries. This city, I'll tell you, even the hospital is a shithole. For the rest of my time in that place, though, I stared at that pin. I couldn't help but wonder what those initials meant. I finally got my walking papers after weeks of physio and OT. It took me a lot longer than that to even begin to feel normal again. I asked Pete about the pin after my discharge, and he reluctantly told me another tip. A society that only meets twice a year. I was astounded at what he told me. I listened and nodded hesitantly when he asked if I was interested in perhaps joining. He described something that I would only later believe to be true once I had seen it with my own eyes. The Society of Untainted Elevator Repairmen. The last line of defense between heaven and hell. After Pete told me about the organization SWRM and everything it stood for, I was flabbergasted. He said they were the last line of defense between hell and earth. But what that meant, I had no idea. I would find out later on all about the secret battle between good and evil that was raging between heaven and hell, with earth caught in the middle, the elevators being the only mode of transportation between all three. Not all elevators, of course, only a chosen few. Some are one-way only. Hellevators, for instance. Those are rides straight to the dark place itself. Then there are the ones that go up, but a rare few can go between all of them. SWRM made sure that none of the boxes were overridden, that no elevators operated without authorization from all three parties involved. We were the representatives of Earth, and kept up the maintenance of the boxes as our end of the bargain, Pete told me. See, once upon a time, it was realized that the big guy upstairs needed to talk to the pointy-haired dude down below once in a while. Don't ask me why, but there's definitely proof of it in the book. Remember Job? Lucifer was up in heaven just walking around and walked up to God and said, "Hey, God, your pal Job wouldn't like you so much if you burned his house down, killed his family." Now would he? The point is, how do you think the devil got up there? Stairs would have taken forever. He definitely took an elevator. Anyways, the reason I'm telling you all this is that I think one of those elevators that goes between all three realms might actually be in my own apartment building. It's a rickety old thing, unassuming, which makes it all the more likely to me. You ever see Indiana Jones and the Quest for the Holy Grail? Then you'll see what I'm saying. The dirty 1940s era elevator is a perfect disguise for something far more grand and complex. And besides, that would explain what happened the other night. It was about 3:30 in the morning, and I was waiting for the elevator with the laundry basket clutched precariously in my arms. The door rattled open, across the steel track, to reveal a thin man in a white three-piece suit. He had a hat, was holding a polished walking stick. Looked like someone from a different era entirely. He smiled at me with thin lips, and waved me into the box. His eyes looked black, with not a hint of color in them. I noticed as the door closed behind me, a shiver running down my spine. He never broke eye contact, just stared at me as if looking straight through me. I broke into a cold sweat as his grin grew wider. "Laundry day?" he asked. "You know it." I tried to pretend everything was okay, knowing that it wasn't. "Gotta make a quick stop first. Hope you don't mind. It won't be long." He poked the steel panel below the elevator buttons with his walking stick, and it popped open, revealing a secret hidden compartment. Inside, it was an additional button, which said on it, "Lowest level." What the hell? "Oh, that's exactly right, young man. I'll pop down to my humble abode, and then you can come back up and do your laundry. On the way down, we can discuss a little business proposition." I looked at him terrified, realizing with dawning apprehension who this man in the crisp white suit really was. "You can't be serious." The words fell out of my mouth, and I closed it before I could say anything else that might offend this thing. "Oh, I am quite serious, in fact. Now, I know you have your oaths and your list of rules with SWRM and all that, but I just want you to consider for a second, just for a second, how good it would feel to have unlimited money. Not only that, but everything that comes along with it. You know chicks dig guys with cash, right? You want a girl? You want a guy? Come on, man, you can't say no to that. Even Bill fucking Gates doesn't have unlimited money, for Christ's sake. All you have to do is sign this. He's holding out a very lengthy contract with the tiniest print I'd ever seen in his hand, the fountain pen in the other, its ink stripping dark crimson red on the floor of the elevator. Sign it. I gulped down nothing but dryness and said no. His anger was immediate, his wrath more than terrifying. You know who you're fucking talking to, shit for brains? I can annihilate you right here and now. Nobody would even know you were gone. I can erase you from the face of the earth so there's no memory of you ever existing at all. Even your parents wouldn't remember you. So let me ask you again. Do you want to sign it? Be my repairman? You know you want to. It's either that or pain. As I shook my head one last time, too numb to speak, I dropped my laundry basket and began to rise up into the air, defying gravity. He held up his hand, made clawing motions downwards, and I felt the skin peel off my face in long, ragged strips. I screamed, and he did it again and again. I howled in pain and twisted away from him with no avail. Will you sign it now? I screamed no. My eyes suddenly felt like they were on fire. They began to pour blood. I wanted so badly to scratch them out of my head. My blood felt like it was boiling in my veins. My breath felt like fire with each agonizing inhalation. Each part of my body was suddenly made of pain. My arms and legs, chest and abdomen. Everything was agony, like it was being seared with a brand that would leave a lifelong scar. Sign it. Never! Ding! Very well, he said as the elevator door opened. It slid to the side to reveal absolute darkness without sound or smell. Maybe next time. He tipped his hat to me, and I stepped into the void. He disappeared instantly. I fell down on the floor of the elevator in my dirty clothes, which thankfully broke my fall. My hand went up to my face to feel the damage there and felt the skin was intact. It was all just a vision the bastard had conjured up to fool me. He had left me unscathed, but utterly terrified. I'm going to take the stairs in my apartment for the rest of the time I'm here. I don't care what anybody says. You guys can all take the elevator. I'll walk.